Good morning. Welcome back to another episode of the Dallas Housing Coalition's Housing for All webinar series. My name is Brian Toney. I'm the Executive Director of the Dallas Housing Coalition, and today is our 39th installment of the Housing for All webinar series, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it's truly big enough for everyone. We hope you've been enjoying these impactful one-on-one conversations with DHC members and other community leaders who are Dallas's strongest advocates for keeping Dallas affordable. We're joined today by Lori Little. Lori served as the president and CEO of the National Affordable Housing Trust, otherwise known as NAHT, for the past 7 years and joined the organization 22 years ago. After working at JP Morgan Chase handling single-family transactions, she was first hired as a closing manager and became the 9th employee at NAHT, a national nonprofit low-income housing tax credit syndicator, which we'll talk more about today, and specialized in financial intermediary and development advising. Little has held key leadership roles at the organization, serving as capital markets and an investor relations director, and played a pivotal role as well in getting affordable housing deals done during the 2008 and 2009 economic crisis, in addition to introducing a whole host of innovative financing models with philanthropic support. So we're super thrilled to welcome you, Lori, to the show.
Thank you so much. What a great opportunity to be here, kind of at the bookend of my career with NAHT, which has just been amazing and truly rewarding to get to work in this field and to help house Americans across the country. So thank you for having me, Brian.
We're lucky to have your expertise here on the show and that national perspective. To begin, let's start with the level setting. I believe you have a few slides that kind of talk about what low-income housing tax credit programs are and how long they've been around and what's most effective about them.
Right. Let me see if I've got these all dialed up across screen. So yes, so I think I'm going to just share. Brian, if you have them, if it's easier for you to share, then why don't we do that across screens? I'm working on that today. So the low-income housing tax credit is about to celebrate its 40th year. It was first started in 1986, and it is it's the largest producer of affordable housing that the United States has ever seen. And it was started by President Reagan. So it is truly an across the aisle type of program. So if we can go to the second slide real quick, and we'll make this available for anyone who's watching this webinar or wants to get a little bit more of a primer on low-income housing tax credits. The good thing about low-income housing tax credits, as you see from this slide, it really produces all kinds of affordable housing, whether it's new construction, multifamily, the acquisition and rehab of existing housing. It can be specialized housing, as you see, for homeless, for veterans, for seniors, urban, rural, suburban locations. All of those have been produced under the low-income housing tax credit. So it is truly a program that is a public-private partnership that involves all of the different players in affordable housing to make this thing happen. Not that it's not, Brian, not that it's without some of its own challenges, compliance issues, and a lot of expense to make it happen, but it has truly been an amazing program that I believe will continue under the current administration because it is across the aisle, both supported by Republicans and Democrats. Just real quickly, low-income housing tax credits are a product that uses tax credits to reduce corporations' tax liability. So when you see a project has been awarded $10 million of tax credits, that means over the next 10 years, the investor in that project that becomes actually a co-owner, long-term involved in that project and cares about what happens, they're able to reduce their tax liability under federal taxes by $10 million. So I think sometimes people are not sure how that works. What that allows, it allows $10 million to come in and develop affordable housing. That's not a loan. That a loan can be, you can still have a mortgage against the property and have that loan, but the finances of the tax credits plus lending really allow the housing project to be affordable. So
Awesome.
that's probably really the basics. There's a whole lot more here. There's a 9% credit, there's a 4% credit. I don't know that we need to go through all of those today. I've probably added, Brian, more than we want to cover in this conversation, but just know that this is a resource that's out there with a good graphic. It is $24.5 billion of annual equity is now being invested in this product. And right now we're seeing the largest increase in the 4% credit, which uses bonds. Banks make up 82% of the market. And then I've got a couple of really basic examples to help readers learn and listeners learn how the credit applies and how it allows you to reduce your tax liability if you're an investor. And it is a partnership. So during the time an investor comes in, they truly are a co-owner of the property. The developer usually drops down to a 0.01% ownership, although they control the property, and the investor is a limited partner at 99.99%. So there's a huge incentive when Comerica Bank or Chase Bank invest. They stay in as a partner and really care about what's happening at that property because they're an owner. And that's one of the things that really, I think, makes this product so significant and such a quality product is all of the people that are keeping eyes on it for a significant period of time. And just a little bit for developers on, what affects your price. It's not only tax credits because they're a partner, they're also getting losses. And when you need that money makes a difference. So that's just probably, Brian, just a little tiny bit how to get a hold of me, a little tiny bit on the product itself. It sounds really strange, the low income housing tax credit. I wish we would have named it something differently a long time ago because it really doesn't speak to what it really does. It makes housing affordable for those at 60% or less, at less average median income, which is firefighters, policemen, teachers, all those people that during COVID, Brian, we suddenly went, oh my gosh, these are the most important people in our society.
Right, our essential workers.
Right, absolutely.
Great. Well, that's a great overview. I know for our audience, these are highly vetted projects on the financing side. They're complicated with multiple layers of capital going into them. There's approvals at the state level, at the local level. They're oftentimes asking for letters of support or no opposition to enhance their projects, but there are only so many tax credits that can go around. Lori, has that been your experience that not every project gets funded, and what happens to the projects that don't receive tax credits?
Right. So most states, and certainly here in Texas, receive about 4 applications for every one project they're able to fund each year. So that means there's a whole team of people thinking that this project in their community has a huge need, and they submit that application to the state. And the state looks at what's important for housing in Texas and makes a decision. In Texas, we award about 90 projects a year using the most coveted, which is a 9% award. And then we continue to do about that number in 4% credits with bonds, but all of those are a limited resource. So that means that since it's really the primary project to build and maintain housing, there's a lot of affordable housing that doesn't get built. And so that's why you see the housing groups being such strong advocates for increasing the low-income housing tax credit and doing more through that tool, because it does afford more than just like with market rate housing, you use conventional financing, which is a mortgage. And
Mm.
once you've mortgaged that, that's kind of all there is. And it's just not sufficient to build housing and then restrict the rents at a lower amount.
Gotcha. So then, with the NAHT, how did, you've been
Yeah.
there for 22 years. What was your like most rewarding accomplishment? Like, how did NAHT help these programs be more successful?
Right. So NAHT is one of about 40 tax credit syndicators. And I always laughed and said we were like the matchmaker. We went out and found projects that we felt were really important. NAHT was a nonprofit. We were very mindful of the residents and what was needed in those projects to help them live their best lives. So we really believe that service enhanced housing was critically important. So we looked for mostly those type projects. And then we found investors that wanted in that area and agreed that that was a good thing. And we brought them together, and then we managed the investors' interest for 15 years. I would tell you when I started this 20 plus years ago, people were talking about the housing they were building. Developers only talked about the bricks and sticks. And when they presented stuff to investors, they would talk about, well, we're building this beautiful building in Oak Cliff. And let me tell you about what the parking looks like. And let me tell you about, it was just all about what they were building.
Mhm.
I really think that, many of the people that live in affordable housing haven't been disadvantaged. They haven't had an opportunity to use their income for other things besides housing. And so we really believe that a service coordinator and services at the housing project really helps many of those residents lead their best lives. So we looked for many ways to enrich that housing with the residents. And we've always talked about the residents that lived in the project. And I am so excited to hear more and more developers talk about now, hey, we're building this housing here. Let me tell you who we're going to build it for and what they're going to be able to do in that. And that's probably been the most rewarding thing I've seen happen.
Yeah, it's great to see developers, community come together, figure out what services are most needed,
Right.
bringing those, to the actual development sites themselves and property management moving forward.
Right. So one of the things I would say that's really interesting, just as a silly example, but something that's not so silly, and it's our family projects. Many of our family projects, the kids in those projects are picked up by a bus, and they go to school, and then they get brought home by a bus. And any special programs at the school or anything like that to enrich and help kids do better happens at the school. Well, in many of our affordable housing family projects, both the parents, if they're fortunate to have two parents, are working really hard and don't get off at 3 or 3:30. So working with having a service coordinator and working with the schools, many of those projects now have some of those services, some of those special programs come to a community center at the affordable housing project to really help kids. That doesn't just happen unless you have someone who's actively focused on making that happen and improve it. And that's usually a service coordinator. So huge difference in those kids' lives.
Yeah. So from the service coordinator, sounds like, one innovation in the last, few decades. Are there any other innovations that, you helped lead, getting philanthropic support that drove real change?
Yes. So we've worked very closely with United Healthcare Insurance and helping them really think about affordable housing and what happens in affordable housing and why is it important to individuals' health, whether it's a senior or a family or a disabled project. And we've helped United Healthcare invest almost $300 million in affordable housing and pair that with grants to those projects to address specific health-related items at that project that are unique to the residents that move into that project. And so really one of the things that they now speak to and talk about when they talk about the social determinants of health, they talk about where someone lives in housing and how that housing feels safe and secure and stable. And that makes a big difference if someone has high blood pressure or diabetes. And then how can they do programs at the project, or how can they help those programs be more effective? And that really improves their lives. That's how we talk about homes, they talk about lives they impact, but they really do align nicely. And they are now one of the, a strong provider and investor of affordable housing. CVS and Aetna do the same. Humana has started thinking about that. That's bringing a whole new group of investors who have tax liability to say, hey, why don't I use some of that to invest in affordable housing? So that's one of the things I'm really proud of that we were able to bring to the table and talk about.
Yeah, it's super exciting. We have members in Children's Health and others that do recognize those social determinants of health, and bringing that perspective. And certainly those insurance companies do have access to a lot of capital, I imagine, that can make these deals possible.
I think some of them look at their tax liability in the billions each year, their federal tax liability. So they have a little room to invest in affordable housing and use some of what we have to offset that.
Right.
I think also thinking about, we've worked closely here in Texas with the Arnold Venture Group. They're housed in Houston, and they're very focused on social justice. And so they have looked at and partnered with NAHT in providing some guarantees for developers who maybe were getting into this space, who wanted to do good work, but balance sheets were lighter. And so investors are looking for specific guarantees and the ability for those developers to provide that guarantee. And so Arnold Venture has come in and provided a backstop guarantee to investors to help some new and emerging developers work in this space and provide affordable housing. So really just thinking about capital that investors and philanthropy has, and the capital that's needed to build affordable housing, and then really make it sing, and how do you pair those? So I really do believe there's lots of opportunity for that. It's just not for the faint of heart, and got to work hard to layer it all in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Especially on the social justice side, we're trying to grow our network of developers, people who are from their own communities, developing in their own communities.
Absolutely.
What else would you like to see done to empower developers of color and others who want to serve their community?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we have done at NAHT, and I want to see it continued, is really lift up and support those developers coming from their communities, and share those opportunities for careers with those communities. And we've you got to think about capital. That's the most important thing for those developers. And so working with community development financial institutions, CDFIs, trying to work with banks to look at their underwriting criteria and look at what is a true risk or what is a perceived risk. You talked a few minutes ago about all of the eyes that are on selecting a project before it gets funded and supported. Maybe some of those, how much money you have for a guarantee long-term for risk, maybe, yes, you need to address that, but maybe since we've done very little calling on those guarantees, maybe they aren't as important as we've thought in the past. So trying to loosen those up, trying to make certain we provide some pre-development capital, and also everybody be okay for a couple of these initial phase projects to say, well, that didn't work out. We spent money on it, but it didn't work out, and we're going to move on to the next one, and not beat ourselves up or beat the developers up for trying something and it didn't work.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you're dropping lots of words of wisdom and nuggets, advice as you transition into a new role or new activities. Is there any other opportunities or advice you'd like to leave with our audience today?
What I would say, one of the things that we talked about was like, what is the next generation? What do they need to do? And I think sometimes in affordable housing, the development team knows the community they're supporting, but there's so many other people that get involved. You may get involved as an architect or as on the financing or on low-income housing tax credits. Take the time, you never feel like you have enough of it, to go and visit the affordable housing area that you're going to be you're providing, whatever you're doing, providing your resource. Go to a grand opening, but better yet, go once the grand opening is over and just say, hey, I worked on this project. I'd love a quick tour, and meet a couple of the people. It will change your perspective on how you do your work, because the people who live in this affordable and live in the housing that we create are doing things that we could never have imagined. And they very much attribute that to have a safe place to call home. And they're quick to tell you that. And it makes you suddenly realize the work that I'm doing, even though I may not be dealing day to day with the residents, the work I'm doing is important. And sometimes we forget that when we're, doing underwriting for hours on a day. And that's great. We need that. But you just have to take the time to go visit and meet the people we're making a difference for.
Yeah, love that. The people behind the numbers and the impact.
Why we do all this.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the last thing I would say is it's not a lot of fun always, but get to know your local legislators and get to know your federal legislators and the staff that is working on housing. And share what you do and why you do it with them. And that makes a big difference. We have to have their financial support and ongoing support for this work. And Brian, you guys are on the front line doing that here in Dallas. And I'm so appreciative and looking forward to being able to take much more of my time to say, yes, in my backyard, how can I help?
That's amazing. I think that's one of the best notes that we can kind of wrap up, today's conversation with, in terms of getting involved and, like you said, inviting our legislators to tour attainable housing projects in our community in Dallas and beyond. We're lucky that you're not leaving Dallas; you're still a resident of Dallas. So,
yes.
Look forward to continuing to work together and how else we can, continue to support, your work or the National Affordable Housing Trust work or VOA of Texas. We'd love to do that.
That's great. Well, we'll be working together lots. We have lots of work to do here in Dallas. We are very fortunate to have a wonderful community, but we have a lot of work to do because we have a lot of people who are still very disadvantaged and have not had the resources and opportunities provided to them that this community should be making sure happen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time today and
thank you.
The presentation. We'll make sure that people can go back and watch this recording on all of our social media platforms and get it uploaded on YouTube. So thank you again for sharing your unique perspective with us.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing lots of ongoing work here in Dallas.
Absolutely. Before we sign off, I want to encourage our listeners to follow our social media accounts for more updates on how to get involved with the Dallas Housing Coalition. We're working on parking reform. The state legislature is ongoing, so there's lots of ways to get this information, including our Housing for All webinar series. And if you're not already a member, please go visit DallasHousingCoalition.com to become one. National Affordable Housing Trust is one. Lots of almost over 300 members now in the last 2 years. So the movement's growing. And thank you again for tuning in to the 39th webinar, where we discussed whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. Have a great weekend.